Being an abolitionist requires unlearning every single thing we've been told about jails, prisons, and police since birth. To consider people as full human beings instead of monsters and psychos. To prioritize community over our selfish need for revenge. This is awkward. 10 demands. And they're about to find out. Every city, every town, burn the precinct to the ground. Badgeless federales sweep you up without a sound. Now they're crying for the Constitution, but the movement moving since the dissolution of the institution of slavery to the slave codes made to be new slaves with new chains and chain gangs to Jim Crow. They imputed crime to color, collapsed communities for profit. Stop and frisk on body cams, reforms not for stopping it, but rather rendering a system even more permanent. So the rich rely on cops, and the cops do the murdering. The media reports to ensure the social scare, so everyone fears a world if cops weren't there. Statistics show cops are trained for collecting collars, and punitive systems produce recidivists and dollars. If you're poor, black and brown, you're born to the siren sound. Tell me how much money are we paying so you'll beat us down?
One time I'll say it out loud, honey. 2 a riot, cop 3 is a crowd. How much money are we paying right now so you'll beat us down? One time I'll say it out loud, honey. 2 a riot, cop 3 is a crowd. How much money are we paying right now so you'll beat us down?
Hello everyone and welcome to the Radical Democracy Show. I'm your host, Kamali Rose, and I am joined today by a special guest. Awkward is a police and prison abolitionist, a rapper, organizer, activist. He is the co-founder of 10 Demands, the co-creator of 10 for Justice, The Road to Abolition, and a founding member of Our United Left. He joins us on the show today to discuss the what, why, and how of police and prison abolition, something that we've talked about a lot on this show, but haven't really been able to dig down into the meat of. So I'm really excited to talk to Awkward today about this because of all the work that he does in this space. So thank you so much, first and foremost, for joining us and for having this conversation. Really appreciate that.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you. A lot of people, they say, the system is broken and we just got to fix the system. We need more body cameras on police. We need more diversity training, more sensitivity training for police. Do you agree with that? Is the system broken? Does it just need a few little fixes to clean it up?
It's intentional, maybe to use the word broken because it suggests that it was something that was proper to begin with, and then there was a little crack that needs to be, filled. It's not broken. It's working exactly as intended. Policing is something that was created post-slavery around the time of the creation of black codes, chain gangs, because they needed a new method of continuing to profit off the backs of black people. They changed laws, they created new laws to make things that black people and former slaves in particular were doing, to make those things felonies so they could incarcerate them, so that they could continue to have slaves. And it's written into our Constitution in the 13th Amendment, slavery is illegal unless as a form of punishment. And so it continues today. Body cams are a great example of a reform that was touted on both sides of the aisle, and is actually the result of the work of police unions and powerful policing supporters, benevolent associations, and pushed through laws across this country, through legislative bodies across this country by elitist liberals who were convinced by the cops themselves that this is the solution and that they don't really want to be killing people. They don't really want to be planting evidence. They don't really want to be raping people. And if we just put body cameras there and we train them better, that maybe they would stop doing these things. But the reason they wanted them was actually because it increases the surveillance state. The body cameras are controlled by the cops. They decide who they're going to film and what they're going to film. Along with all of the other cameras that are on us at all times nowadays, it's creating a more fuller picture for cops to surveil us to further benefit off of the surveillance and patrolling of criminalized communities. They can turn them off, and they do. And as we've seen with the introduction of body cameras all across the country, they still kill 3 people a day. They still rape people in their custody, and there are laws in, I believe, 35 states that allow this. It's actually legal to have sex with someone in your custody as a police officer. They are still responsible for 1/3 of all stranger murders in this country. And of course, it's still Black people are 300% more likely to be the victims. Latinos are 150% more likely. They're just using these reforms to strengthen the system. Whenever you implement a reform, you're saying once again that this is what it is. We are assuming that the only solution to public safety is police and incarceration. And so we just want to change it a little, maybe a more gentler version of genocide. So another example in terms of incarceration would be electronic monitoring and probation and parole. These are things that were introduced as reforms to make it better than putting someone in a cage. Only now we've increased the incarceration state, and there are people who are being monitored and who are essentially incarcerated at home who, if that didn't exist, would never have been sent to prison in the first place. So again, each time we do this, we're not actually questioning the validity of the system. We're just making it stronger and appeasing those who think these are solutions.
Black Lives Matter recently released the Black Lives Matter Global Network, I should say. Black Lives Matter, of course, as everyone familiar with this show will know, is a decentralized movement. There is no leader of Black Lives Matter. It is a grassroots decentralized movement. However, there are these organizations that have been creeping up here, and one of them is the Black Lives Matter Global Network, and they released a set of 7 demands. And in their set of 7 demands, the first 4 of those demands specifically refer to Donald Trump and the Republican Party. The first 4 are convict and ban Trump from future political office, expel Republican members of Congress who attempted to overturn the election and incite a white supremacist attack, launch a full investigation into the ties between white supremacy and the Capitol Police, law enforcement, and the military, and permanently ban Trump from all digital media platforms. So 2 out of those 4, they're specifically about Donald Trump. 1 is about the Republican members of Congress, and 1 is to go and launch an investigation, which is to do more policing. So have some police investigate some other police, apparently. This would seem to suggest that the problem of policing is an issue specific to the Republican Party. Does this seem like a proper list of demands for solving the issues of police brutality and policing in prison?
That was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. I was so confused and, I'm not sure if I can say shocked, but I was just flabbergasted when I saw this. Those demands couldn't be more dissimilar from the 10 demands that I helped create. In no way does this address policing. In no way does this address the systems that exist to continue to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. Focusing on Republicans suggests, as you said, that Democrats are all leftist revolutionaries who want to undo carceral punishment, and also focusing on Donald Trump and what happened on January 6th is incredibly limiting. First of all, there are many Donald Trumps across this country, and if we ban him from running again, they're going to put someone else in his place. Having police, as you said, police themselves is the same thing that they're suggesting with the George Floyd Act. That is also a joke. They're giving $750 million more to police themselves. And we already know that through qualified immunity, cops are essentially allowed to do what they do with impunity. When they are tried, it's like one in 9 cases at most end up in favor of the victim. And 99% of instances of police brutality and corruption, they're never even charged. So the whole idea that, police and DAs are going to ensure accountability and transparency, that's absurd. We need independent investigations as we defund police on the road to abolition. So I didn't understand these demands at all. I mean, if they were created to address systemic racism, to address police violence and mass incarceration, they're not going to do anything like that. I was just completely confused. Movement for Black Lives was instrumental in the creation of something called the Breathe Act that we do support, and that is providing alternative solutions to policing and imprisonment that actually makes us safer in a way that police have proven not to do. They strengthen our communities and they strengthen the people who live in those communities, their lives and their opportunities. And this is how we make us safer. Honestly, the way you described Black Lives Matter was interesting to me because it is decentralized in the sense that, there are tons of Black activists and other activists of color, white activists who believe that Black Lives Matter and believe that there need to be instrumental changes in the system. The system needs to be dismantled, like major changes, not incremental reforms to demonstrate that we as a country are willing to protect Black lives. But Black Lives Matter is also, as you said, this organization that had chapters all over the country. And a number of the chapters have broken away from the national organization because of similar issues with lack of transparency, lack of accountability, and notably ties to the Democratic Party, working with the Democratic Party to elect certain people, as opposed to focusing on the underlying issue that no politicians in office today are really trying to address. So that's why I say it wasn't terribly shocking to see, but I still didn't get it at all. It's such a distraction. And I said that when all of a sudden, we start trying to impeach Donald Trump for a second time as he's exiting the office anyway, in the midst of a global pandemic where we have not done anywhere near what other similar countries have done. Our response was like one of the worst in the world. People are starving. People don't have jobs. People don't have health care. And our politicians are focusing on punishing one person.
Yeah. Against the backdrop of these things that they call systemic problems and systemic issues and existential crises, it seems very narrow-sighted to and short-sighted to be focused on, individuals. That would suggest that, police brutality didn't exist before Donald Trump, essentially, or in that Black lives somehow did matter before Donald Trump came into office, or the Capitol, was attacked.
Right. And also that white supremacy was a creation of the last 4 years or something. We know that white supremacy was never more open to the public, never more easily accessible than during President Trump's term, because he facilitated it and enabled it and celebrated it, calling Nazis very fine people and telling the Proud Boys to stand back and wait for what we ended up seeing was the January 6th insurrection. But the fact that so many cops participated from all over the country in that so-called insurrection, the fact that we know that for decades, white supremacists have been infiltrating police departments. And since we know the policing in and of itself is a white supremacist institution, none of this was created by Donald Trump, and none of it will be fixed by banning Donald Trump or punishing the people who honestly exercise their First Amendment rights to protest. Do I agree with what they were protesting? Absolutely not. I think more than anything, this moment in time, January 6th, was most telling in how the police responded to them. The police are, I think, 300% more likely to respond with violence to leftist protesters. And we saw that. This wasn't a violent storming of the Capitol. They waltzed right in. They were handheld on the way out.
Yeah, we saw them taking selfies with them and, opening doors and, walking through with them. So it's certainly different than the action I've seen, tactics like kettling that they used when we were at protests here in Boston to, block protesters into a really tight space. They had, National Guard out there, and then they released tear gas and start to, create and incite the actual violence. Last I checked, to your point there about, the Republican Party versus Democrats, Black Lives Matter being is sort of beholden to the Democratic Party. Black Lives Matter Global Network created a super PAC, which allows them to donate to specific candidates, and they've been donating to certain Democratic candidates as well. But last I checked, it was Joe Biden and Bill Clinton who instituted the 1994 crime bill that has exacerbated the mass incarceration problem in this country. And like you said earlier, it creates this set of slave laborers through prison labor, and that was done not by the Republican Party, but very much so by the Democratic Party. It seems like they're in this constant battle to see who can be more pro-cop and pro-law enforcement, and there's just a constant shift towards the right in that regard. They finally mentioned the Breathe Act in the Black Lives Matter list of demands as number 7. It's the lowest one down. To me, when you're giving a list of demands, it should be in order of priority, so that you're saying these are the first ones we need met. And all the way down at number 5, they finally get around to talking about defunding police, and then number 7 is past the Breathe Act. But they also in that are very fawning over Joe Biden, giving him credit for things I don't think that he really necessarily deserves credit for. They say that President Biden has already drawn on the Breathe Act in his executive actions, calling for racial equity screens in federal programs, investing in environmental justice at historic levels, and engaging with system impacted communities. Again, talking about the system. They are claiming that Joe Biden has already done all these great things. And really, if anyone's paying attention, we've had no systemic changes. We are one of only 2 countries in the world that have a cash bail system. The other one being the Philippines, under a brutal dictator who supports extrajudicial killings of people who do drugs. This would seem like some of the most obvious types of reforms to make, and there's been nothing on that. You mentioned qualified immunity. There's been no changes to qualified immunity. What do you think about the Derek Chauvin verdict? What are your thoughts on that? Has justice been served now? Is that some sign the system is changing, the system is being fixed?
No. It was symbolic, but also, it was the result of that jury. It was symbolic that the jury was even given the opportunity to be on that case. Typically, they would never go to trial. And all we needed to see was what happened throughout the country on that very day. Yeah. Cops killed twice as many people as they normally do across the country on the day that Derek Chauvin was found guilty. So no, that didn't change anything. It's pandering to Joe Biden to talk so much about all of these things that he's doing. People on the streets, people in real communities haven't seen the results of these changes. The most prominent thing that I saw from a criminal justice perspective, so to speak, was his declaration that he was going to make private prisons illegal. And again, celebrated by everybody who wants gentler form of genocide. What people don't understand is that, one, it's a reform that repeats the assumption that prison is the solution. It's not private prisons, it's just regular prisons. And it also ignores the fact that less than 5% of prisons are private, and all prisons and all detention centers are profit sources. That the same companies that donate to police foundations, donate to the tough on crime politicians, also are the ones profiting off of prison labor, off of the clothing, the food, the telephone services, and everything else that exists in local jails, state prisons, ICE facilities, and everything else. And the same companies are also involved in the electronic monitoring and all of the pre and post incarceration justice that people receive. So no, the Chauvin verdict didn't change anything. And this system is way too complex and way too powerful for something like one trial or ending the most obvious version of the profit motive to make any significant change.
If Joe Biden was serious about, any kind of closing of private detention centers, he should have at least simultaneously closed the migrant detention centers, which for those, over 70% of the people held, and those are held in private institutions. And in that case, I don't think that you can just, all that they did with the private prisons, they just simply moved those people from private prisons to public prisons, where there's still all the types of abuses that you mentioned. There's still, this slave labor that is legal. However, if you were to close down the private migrant facilities, then that would be 70% of those people that are being housed, and that would require actually moving those people out of facilities altogether. And we saw nothing in that regard. And so I think right. Your point definitely rings true there. So given this list of 7 demands, how do you think that it compares to the list of 10 demands that you've put forward?
Well, I mean, there's no comparison. It's a completely different kind of thing. The 10 demands for justice are designed as a roadmap to complete abolition. Prisons were never intended to make us safer, and police were never intended to make us safer. Police are the most violent people in this country, and they only solve 2% of major crimes and are not there to stop crime as it's happening. There are hundreds of thousands of rape kits that are just sitting there, never tested. If either one of us did our job correctly 2% of the time, we wouldn't have a job. They just get more money and more money to support their further militarization and enabling them to continue to kill us with more and more impressive weaponry. In prisons, there's the little programming that used to exist to actually rehabilitate people, with the Pell Grants no longer being applicable to people who are incarcerated. It was just another clear point being made that prison is not intended for penitence or rehabilitation, but just to disappear as many people as possible from the communities we've already criminalized. And the crazy part is recidivism rates are so high because, one, they are not given any opportunities to actually grow and transform while in prison. And when they get out, these reentry services are completely insufficient. But of course, there's 2 other aspects to that. We clearly are not incarcerating people for our safety as we claim, because, one, prison expansion was at its highest when crime was dramatically decreasing. On top of that, when they come out, they're just as violent, if not more violent, as they ever were, or if they ever were. We know that they're coming out. The vast in there for life. The 10 demands are looking to change all of this. Okay, so it starts with defunding the police, and it's not necessarily in order of most important, and it's not necessarily in order of chronology. It was more like we thought through all of the things that had to happen, and they kind of go in order of importance and kind of go in order of chronology. Defund had to happen first because it's step 1. As we defund the police departments, we are taking all of that money and putting them into alternative mechanisms that actually keep us safer, like jobs training, like education, like free healthcare. The actual justice system itself, a new form of justice where both the victim and the perpetrator, who has typically been a victim themselves, are both repaired and transformed in the process. And then new mechanisms where people are actually held responsible as human beings to their communities that they've harmed, or those individuals that they've harmed, where there's rehabilitation, where there's community service, which all of these things put together will make us safer. And there's billions and trillions of dollars of money in police departments. And it actually, after all of this work in 2020, after all of the defund movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, funding for police departments actually increased again in 2021. So all of that money is simultaneously being put where it belongs and out of the hands of the people, the police who are patrolling us, providing instead social workers who are actually trained to address mental health crises, providing wellness checks for communities instead of patrols and looking for crimes to arrest people. Biggest misconception over time, where we're defunding and reallocating to the point where we are at a place where we can defund down to 0. There are certain things that we can do away with right away. There's no reason for police departments to have PR departments. There's no reason for cops to be getting more money for more training or hiring new people or expanding or improving the looks of their facilities. There's no reason to have police unions that are responsible for preventing these changes that we actually need. And all of that can happen today, along with ending qualified immunity, ending cash bail. But the road to abolition takes time. If we were to remove all cops and all prisons tomorrow, free everybody, we would be in deep trouble, because for years we've relied on these things that don't actually work, and we don't have any of these alternative mechanisms yet. In a lot of cities across the country, defunding has begun, reallocation of the money has begun. There are programs such as in Portland and Austin and other cities where there are people responding to crisis calls that are not heavily armed and who are trained to de-escalate. And these things are working. So over time, as we're defunding and reallocating, we're getting more and more research to prove our point that, just like in New York City, when the cops went on strike and didn't work, we are actually safer than when they're there doing their jobs. And then eventually we'll be at the point where cops in cages aren't necessary. As we're defunding down to zero, we're providing these alternative mechanisms, and eventually we'll get to the point where cops in cages are no longer necessary. But in the meantime, as cops are still going to be there have to be fundamental changes, not body cams so they can record themselves killing us, actual accountability, actual transparency. Black people and Native people need reparations. And that's what the 10 demands for justice are about. It's creating, stronger communities and implementing significant system dismantling changes, so that, over time we are in a position where an abolitionist society is not only is beyond just conceptual, but like feasible, realistic, and effective.
Yeah. And I mean, things that I saw on the 10 demands for justice that definitely, resonated with me, that were glaring omissions from the Black Lives Matter demands were you call for an end to the war on drugs, and the criminalization of drugs. We've seen that people in the United States often don't look outside of the United States. They're sort of where we get caught in a bubble often. Our media has a way of doing that to us and trying to keep our perspectives limited. But Portugal has made a similar move of decriminalizing all drugs, and we've seen that the problem of overdosing, they changed it from a criminal issue to a health issue, and they went from one of the highest rates of overdoses in all of Europe to one of the lowest rates in all of Europe. There's a few points on your list of 10 demands that really resonated with me and seemed like glaring omissions from the Black Lives Matter list of demands. And so I definitely, the 10 demands for justice seems like a true systemic approach to resolving this problem. And you didn't back down from things like reparations, which this I think is an important step and something that all too often people shy away from because it's not considered a popular position. And oftentimes, with the sort of politicians that we have, if things aren't popular, they simply, they ignore it, even if it may be the morally correct thing to do. If it's not the politically, correct or politically, astute thing to do, they shy away from it. And so I think that it is significant that you included that, and also decriminalizing, ending the war on drugs. I think that was another glaring omission from the Black Lives Matter list of demands. And I don't know how we can talk about, ending, or fixing the problem of something like mass incarceration without ending a war on drugs, which, sees, millions of nonviolent people, simply having a health issue, putting a chemical into their body, are criminalized for that behavior. And it's something like you said earlier. You said that what they're able to do is simply criminalize behavior, and there's an incentive there because of there's a profit motive there. So there's an incentive for them to lobby for more, stricter penalties. This is what we saw in the 1994 crime bill, mandatory minimums, 3 strike laws that just continue the problem. So a lot of people, they ask, well, what do we do with all the murderers and the rapists? What are we going to do with all the murderers and the rapists when we abolish prisons and abolish police? What is your response to that?
So the first thing I'll say is that, the vast majority of the people who are in prison are nonviolent. The vast majority of those are in for drug offenses. The number of people who have committed crimes versus the number of people who are criminalized, there's no relation. There's certain people who are criminalized, and then others who have the same behaviors are not. White people are just as likely to use drugs as Black people and are more likely to sell drugs. But if you look at the people in prison, that's not what you see. Serial killers are less than 1%. Murders typically happen between people who know each other, and 1/3 of stranger murders are committed by cops. The first thing to do is acknowledge that what we have now is working as intended, but is not working for us. Cops aren't preventing crime and preventing rape. The statistics are there. It's study after study. Propose a solution, propose an alternative. Not done in isolation, as we talked about it, where people are actually, held responsible for their human actions against other human beings. And through transformative justice, everyone is repaired and transformed through the process. There are institutions that are created for those who outpatient services don't work, for people who can't necessarily be healed and are not safe for themselves or others, but they're non-carceral. They don't mimic prisons or the mental health treatment centers of old. They're not places of torture, but places of safety. We treat mental health crises as mental health crises. We treat drug addiction as health crises because that's what they are. So part of abolition, part of the road to abolition, as we're defunding, is eliminating discriminatory policing, prosecution, and sentencing, because it's not really that we're putting all of the bad guys away. We're putting people away who we've criminalized before they've ever done anything. And interactions with police have been shown to increase the likelihood of future criminality. So with cops constantly patrolling you, stopping and frisking you, that's how we end up with 1 in 3 Black boys born today winding up in prison. It's not because they're all killing people. That's just a fallacy. And the media is complicit, along with the politicians, in creating this social panic, this fear about all of this stuff: rape, pedophilia, murder. The way to address those issues is by building stronger, healthier communities and helping the people who are most likely to commit those types of crimes. Most crimes are not that. They're crimes of desperation. Poverty is criminalized in this country. So it is people who are involved in or the sex trade, being in public and peeing. So there was someone who I just shared recently who was attacked and punched repeatedly by multiple cops for peeing. He doesn't have a house, so he has to pee somewhere, and no business is going to let that person in. That is not a crime. That is a human function. These are the people filling our jails and prisons. 75% of the people in jail haven't even been convicted of a crime. They're legally innocent. So that's my answer. Acknowledge that what we have now is not doing what you think it does, and then use your imagination. Be creative. Come up with alternative solutions and test them. This isn't going to be perfect, but when I interviewed Alec Karakatsanis, who founded Civil Rights Corps recently, about this, he said the idea that we'll ever live in a society where there is never crime or there's 100% safety is absurd. We are human, and humans are fallible. So that shouldn't even be the goal. The goal is to maximize human flourishing. And abolition is going to do that in a way that cops in cages don't.
Wonderfully said. I couldn't agree more, honestly. There's also, rapes are happening in prisons as well. We know that there's a whole rape culture, surrounding prisons as well. It's talked about in the media, and it's so prominent that it's been made a joke at this point. But the people, some people will say, oh, that's just rapists and murderers, or rapists raping other rapists. But like you said, the majority of people that are in prison are not in there for for these violent crimes. I mean, 3 strike laws can get you a life sentence in prison for drugs, for marijuana, which is now like, you can, in my state of Massachusetts, you can have you can order it online. Yeah, yes, exactly. And like you said, this is, it's out of desperation. There's a reggae artist, Tanya Stevens, and she says, providing no jobs and telling us stop the crime is like beating a child and telling them not to cry. When people don't have resources, they do desperate things. If you got to feed your kids, you're going to steal a loaf of bread to do that. And I don't think that anyone with any kind of sense would call you a criminal for that, for trying to feed your kids, for stealing from Walmart, some corporation that has, a family with the richest, wealthiest people. And there are people literally locked up in jail right now for stealing from Walmart, poor people. So certainly I don't think that anyone that watches this show at least would disagree with that. So you mentioned that you live in New York, and I think something that sort of connects all of this, that sort of connect the tissue to all this, is that recently you guys have there in New York City, they have a mayoral race going on right now, and the top 2 candidates are Andrew Yang and Eric Adams. Eric Adams is a former police officer, and and Andrew Yang has been trying to out-cop the cop, it seems. He's trying to position himself as even more pro-police than this former cop, Eric Adams. And those are the top 2 people polling in that race right now. And Andrew Yang actually recently made statements saying, he said, the truth is New York City cannot afford to defund the police. He also said that nothing works in our city without public safety, and for public safety, we need police. How do you respond to this? The idea that New York City, which has, as far as I understand it, there was a study that said their official budget is $6 billion. However, when you actually tally it all up, it's about $10 billion is the police budget in New York City, not the whole state, but just New York City. That's larger than the military budget of countries like Norway, Sweden, Ukraine. Can New York City afford to defund the police?
Absolutely. I laughed when I heard that. It's not funny at all, but it's hysterical how backwards this is, and yet how common this is. Like, someone has said that, like, to be an abolitionist, you have to unlearn everything you've been taught since birth. And that's actually the intro, part of the intro to the song and video I created called 10 Demands after our organization. And it shouldn't be so hard because the research is there. Yang said this right after there was an attack in Times Square, where there are more cops in New York City than anywhere else in the country. And in that particular place, that's where all of them are situated. And yet the crime still happened. So isn't that saying the opposite of we need more of them? We already have so many and it doesn't work. It's because they don't stop crime. And they don't, as we've discussed, they don't address crimes after they've happened. You have to find ways to solve the underlying issues that cause people to commit crimes in the first place. So yeah, for what it's worth, we are supporters of Diane Morales. She is for defunding to abolish. And, New York defunded, in quotes, last year, and everyone was celebrating. It's unbelievable the way the news and politicians manipulate people. All they did was transfer school, in quotes again, safety officers from the police budget to the school budget. So while cutting actual education funding, they increased the education budget and decreased the police budget by taking the people who facilitate the school to prison pipeline, who militarize learning centers of learning, and just putting them in a different section of the budget. That's not what defunding actually means. Defunding is removing that money from the police department and putting it in actual programs that will educate and, you know, and improve the health of the people in our communities. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Eric Adams is and Andrew Yang are, you know, trying to be, you know, Giuliani 2.0. I mean, that's the way they're talking, and we should have learned our lesson that this doesn't work. Stop and frisk is unconstitutional. The Attorney General, Letitia James, has actually sued the NYPD for their response to the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. You know, the NYPD is like the biggest gang in this country, and giving them more money, you know, it's asinine. The only reason we really know what happened to Eric Garner is because his friend Ramsey Orta was so used to being stopped and frisked and brutalized by police that he had started to actually have his phone in his hand with the camera on, ready to record as soon as he stepped out of the house. That's how often it happened to them, and that's how he was able to record the murder of his friend. And how did they respond to him releasing that video? They criminalized, targeted, and harassed him until they were able to incarcerate him. And then they tried to have him killed in jail. So these are not the people I want to give my money to. I want teachers to be paid well. I want mutual aid, you know, across the country, and particularly where I live. You know, those around me, I know, cannot afford to feed their families or go to the doctor. We need treatment centers where, you know, people who don't have the money to go be rich and fancy at Betty Ford get similar treatment to those who can and don't have to pay for it. These are the ways that we build our society.
Yeah, and to your point, that Ramsey Orta is, as far as I know, he was the only person in that entire situation that ended up in prison. The cop that, you know, choked the life out of Eric Garner is still roaming free to this day. And, you know, none of them, you know, so you can kill, a person who is accused of selling a loose cigarette, and that's somehow completely acceptable and justified, apparently, in this current system that we have. While, you know, this nonviolent Ramsey Orta is gets locked up for years.
I mean, the worst thing that the worst thing that's likely to happen is you'll be put on paid leave. Maybe you'll lose your job. Usually you don't. Often those who have lost their jobs, there's an actual thing, like I think it's called wandering cops. I forget. There's a term that's been popularized where cops who are removed from one department are just hired elsewhere. And it's rare that they're removed in the first place, but when they are, their record doesn't go with them. They just get hired elsewhere. You know, and the worst part of all is that our tax dollars are going to pay their exorbitant six-figure salaries. And then on top of it, we're the ones paying for all the civil suits for the tens of thousands of times they have, you know, take advantage of their power, done something illegal, beaten or murdered someone. It doesn't come out of their pensions. It doesn't come out of their personal liability insurance, but it should. And that's in the 10 demands as well.
I think there was a study done and released in like I think it was published in 2020, or at least a paper that was written. I think it was out of Duke Law, and it's called The Wandering Officer. And they really, you know, they studied this concept of, like, you know, law enforcement officers fired by one department and then for serious misconduct, and because we know that people, they don't. Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, it has to rise to that level, and they still end up finding jobs elsewhere. Yeah, thank you for helping us, you know, get educated on some of this stuff. This is, I think that a lot of folks watching, you've answered, you know, all the questions that were always sort of sitting in the back of my mind, because for a long time I shied away from the idea of abolition, and I think that you've answered, you know, in your 10 demands and through the work that you're doing has honestly been a big part of me coming around to really recognizing that I am an abolitionist, a full abolitionist. And so I just wanted to thank you for the work that you're doing, and just encourage you to continue doing what you're doing. Is there anywhere that people, you know, where else can folks find you? For one, we got links to your door to the 10 demands, 10forjustice.com is in the description box below. You'll find it there. You'll find links to where you can find Awkword's website. He's got tons of resources on there. Check out his music is amazing. We're gonna play, we're gonna play some clips from the 10 Demand song, and I think folks I love the track. Great work there, and So anywhere else that folks can find you, or anything else that you want to plug before we go?
No, thank you so much. I just wanted to say I'm really glad to hear that the work that I and we have been doing has had an impact on you, one person at a time. I really think a big part of this is education and awareness. People don't really understand what abolition is, and once they do, it's not very hard to convince them why they belong on that side. And the only other thing I'll add is that, once you're there are things you can do to take action in your community. For one, you can support mutual aid efforts in your community. You can go to your local courts and police the prosecutors and judges, hold them accountable for, what they're trying to do to them. And if you look at my website, thisisawkword.com, on the video journalism section, my interview with AWKWORD that I mentioned previously, he talks also about what you can do in your own communities. There's a lot of opportunities for you to help and start paving the path toward an abolitionist society. For one reason or another, not able to go out and protest. You're not able to financially support mutual aid efforts. You're stuck at home for whatever reason it might be. It's as simple as sending a text, and you can send our open letter to your governor, your mayor, your state, or your federal congressperson, explaining to them why it starts with defunding and why defunding needs to start now.
Yeah, and I urge everyone watching this to please immediately click right now, go in the description box below. You'll find a link to the 10 demands for justice, the 10 for justice, and to Awkward site. We need to continue to grow this movement and to get some more support behind it. There's work that we can all do, individually as well to support this right where we are locally. We should absolutely be doing everything that we can. We can't rely and wait on a bunch of politicians to fix this problem for us, because that's not in their interest. They're not going to come around and fix it. We got to fix it for ourselves. And we got to start doing the work in our communities where we can actually impact change. Thank you so much, Awkward, for joining us today. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time out. I know you're busy, so I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate you too.
Being an abolitionist requires unlearning every single thing we've been told about jails, prisons, and police since birth. To consider people as full human beings instead of monsters and psychos. To prioritize community over our selfish need for revenge. This is Awkward, 10 demands. And they're about to find out. Every city, every town, burn the precinct to the ground. Badgeless federales sweep you up without a sound. Now they're crying for the Constitution, but the movement moving since the dissolution of the institution of slavery to the slave codes made to be new slaves with new chains and chain gangs to Jim Crow. They imputed crime to color, collapsed communities for profit. Stop and frisk on body cams, reforms not for stopping it, but rather rendering a system even more permanent. So the rich rely on cops, and the cops do the murdering. The media reports to ensure the social scare, so everyone fears a world if cops weren't there. Statistics show cops are trained for collecting collars, and punitive systems produce recidivists and dollars. If you're poor, black, and brown, you're born to the siren sound. Tell me, how much money are we paying so you'll beat us down?
One time I'll say it out loud, honey. 2 a riot, cop 3 is a crowd. How much money are we paying right now so you'll beat us down? One time I'll say it out loud, honey. 2 a riot, cop 3 is a crowd. How much money are we paying right now so you'll beat us down?
How much are we paying for the cops in cages? Patrolling and chasing, turn the block to Hades. Controlling the nation, no pops for babies. We've been selling and throwing rocks for ages. There's no education, so we clock for wages. There's no medication, so there's stock in the basement. No justification, pop with no hesitation. No reparations, so we fight the enslavement.
One time I'll say it out loud, honey. To a riot, cop 3 is a crowd. How much money are we paying right now so you'll beat us down? One time I'll say it out loud, honey. To a riot, cop 3 is a crowd. How much money are we paying right now so you'll beat us down?
The revolution's now, we still can't breathe. You think it's revolutionary, defunding police? That's phase 1, we will abolish the beast. Demilitarize and allocate funds to our needs. Cops don't stop crime, so we're placing peacekeepers, training counselors, mediators and teachers, freeing protesters, political leaders, and blasting revolutionary rap from the speakers. We getting reparations and apologies for past and current crimes, damaged psychologies. The war on drugs is over, watch the drop in all the robberies. Close the jails and prisons, equalized economy. Try to try me, and we could still be enemies in this new society without the death penalty. No illegal immigrants, no victims in the pens, no corporate profiting, no crime and punishment. We'll tend to mental ailments, apply an intervention, ending the surveillance, denying all detention, rebuilding our communities, village by village. It's time to check your white male heterosexual privilege.
One time I'll say it out loud, honey. To a riot, cop 3 is a crowd. How much money are we paying right now so you'll beat us down? One time I'll say it out loud, honey. To a riot, cop 3 is a crowd. How much money are we paying right now so you'll beat us down?